This is Atlas, broadcasting from Station Zebra. If you can hear me, you're still here, still listening, still surviving. Hold on to that. The time doesn't matter. It hasn't mattered for a while now. But if you're looking for a number, it's been 32 days since my last transmission. Feels like longer. Feels like time itself is stretching, pulling at the seams of whatever's left of this world. Let's get to it. If you've been looking up lately, you've noticed it. Something's wrong with the sky. The stars are different now. They move when they shouldn't, shift places as if being rearranged by something unseen. Maybe you haven't noticed yet, or maybe you convinced yourself you were imagining it. You're not. They don't stay in one place anymore. Last week, a survivor passing through Zone G3 swore they saw Orion's belt unravel, each star drifting apart like something had reached up and plucked them loose. The next night, the entire formation was gone. No trace, just empty space where it used to be. It isn't just the stars. The clouds, if you can call them that, don't behave the way they should. Some hang motionless for days, unmoving, even when the wind howls through broken streets and shattered windows. Others spiral in perfect circles, like something is coiling itself around the sky, tightening, watching. There are reports of people staring too long at these clouds and losing time. Minutes, hours gone. When they snap back, they don't remember what they were thinking about before, just an overwhelming sense of something pressing down on them. Some describe it as a weight on their chest, others as hands on their shoulders. But they all agree on one thing: whatever's up their nose, we're down here. Then there's the color. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. The sky isn't just blue anymore. At dusk, it shifts. Deep violet, rust red. A sickly, bruised yellow that lingers just a little too long after the sun should have set. And some nights, there's no color at all. Just black. Not the kind you remember. Not the peaceful darkness of nightfall, but an emptiness that swallows everything. It doesn't stretch infinitely like space. It ends. And if you stare long enough, you can see something moving behind it. Survivors near the remnants of Zone D5 reported seeing shapes in the clouds. Massive, coiling things that only revealed themselves when the lightning flashed. They said it looked like something enormous was pressing against the sky from the other side, trying to break through. I don't know if they're right, but the fact that multiple people saw the same thing, that's enough for me to take it seriously. And it should be enough for you too. And then there's what happened over Zone E2 3 nights ago. The sun disappeared in the middle of the afternoon. One moment the sky was bright, the next it was twilight. No warning, no eclipse, just an absence of light. It lasted for 3 hours. People who were there said they could still see the sun, but it wasn't giving off light anymore. It just hung there, cold and dim, like something had drained it dry. Then, just as suddenly as it had vanished, it came back, flaring so bright that some of them were blinded for hours. But the worst part, the shadows it left behind. When the sun returned, it cast shadows in places where nothing stood. Long, reaching shapes stretched across the ground, moving like they belonged to something that wasn't there. Some of them lingered even after the light corrected itself, bending, twisting. One survivor claimed she saw one of those shadows move toward her, dragging itself across the pavement like it was alive. When she ran, it followed. She swears she only escaped because she jumped into the back of a truck, shutting herself inside before it could reach her. The sun isn't safe anymore. It flickers now. Some days it looks too large, too close, like it's pressing down on the earth. Other days it's pale, weak, barely holding itself together. If you see it start to pulse, if you notice the light stretching in ways it shouldn't, take cover. Whatever's happening up there, we're not meant to see it. And if you find yourself looking up, if you catch something staring back, don't stay out in the open. The sky is watching, and I don't think it likes what it sees. If you're on foot, if you're still trying to find safe ground, you need to listen carefully. The land beneath us isn't stable anymore. Not just the roads and the ruins, not just the cracks splitting open the old highways. Something deeper, something shifting. The earth is moving in ways it shouldn't, and it's getting worse. Survivors across multiple zones have reported tremors, but not like the ones we used to know. No earthquakes, no aftershocks, just a deep, rhythmic groaning, as if the planet itself is straining under some unseen weight. The worst part, these tremors don't shake the land evenly. They come in waves, rolling through the ground like something massive is moving underneath, something shifting just below the surface. And when it passes, the terrain doesn't always go back to the way it was before. I passed through a stretch of road 2 weeks ago that should have been familiar. I'd been there before, used the same cracked pavement as a guide. But this time, the road wasn't just broken, it was wrong. Coiled, curved back on itself, looping in ways that made no sense. I walked for hours, following the same painted lines, but they led nowhere, folding into each other like a Mobius strip of shattered asphalt. When I finally turned around, retracing my steps, the way back wasn't there anymore. I don't know how I made it out, but I'm certain of one thing. Some places are rearranging themselves while we sleep. The land isn't just shifting horizontally. Some areas are sinking. Whole stretches of ground have dropped away overnight, leaving behind pits that shouldn't exist. These aren't sinkholes. They're smooth, almost too precise, as if the earth wasn't collapsing but being taken, scooped out like something beneath us was hungry. A survivor from Zone C4 described watching an entire farmhouse vanish as the ground beneath it simply folded inward. No dust, no debris, just an absence where something should have been. And then there are the holes. Some of you have seen them. You know the ones I'm talking about. Deep, circular voids appearing without warning, perfectly symmetrical. Too dark to see the bottom. No rubble around the edges. No sign of a collapse. Just a sudden absence. A few people have tried dropping stones, flare sticks, even ropes down them. They never hear the impact. It's as if the holes don't have a bottom at all. Just an endless descent into something that doesn't want to be found. Survivors near Zone E6 reported a hole that wasn't there the day before. They say it hummed, not like an echo, not like wind passing through a canyon, but something alive. One of them got too close, said he felt his bones vibrating, like the very air around it was pulling at him. They dragged him back before he could fall in, but he wasn't the same afterward. He stopped speaking, just stared at the ground, hands shaking, mouth moving soundlessly like he was trying to repeat something none of us could hear. They left him behind 3 days later. If it was just sinkholes, just tremors, maybe we could call it natural. Maybe we could convince ourselves this is the aftershock of war, of the bombs, of everything humanity has done to this planet. But it's more than that. The ground is alive in ways it shouldn't be. I've heard too many stories of dirt shifting underfoot like liquid, of people taking a step only to feel the earth ripple away from them. Some survivors swear they've seen footprints appear beside them, pressed into the dust with no one there to make them. And then there's the reports of places that shouldn't exist. People walking into valleys that never used to be there, ridges that weren't on the maps before. Survivors in Zone F2 found an entire hillside where there had only been flat land weeks before. They climbed it, thinking they'd get a better vantage point, but once they reached the top, they couldn't find the way back down. The landscape around them had changed. Their footprints led nowhere. They camped there for 3 days, watching the land rearrange itself around them. When they finally got down, the hill was gone. The deeper underground you go, the worse it gets. Caves are stretching further than they should, tunnels opening into chambers that shouldn't be there. Some survivors have gone below and never come back. Others have returned with stories of walls breathing, of corridors narrowing behind them, sealing them in before somehow spitting them back out miles from where they started. If you think a basement, a bunker, an underground shelter is safe, think again. The ground isn't a refuge anymore, and there's something else. Something I've only heard in whispers, in fragmented messages from survivors too afraid to talk for long. There are things moving beneath us, not burrowing, not tunneling, moving. Like the land itself is shifting to make way for something deeper, something waking up. Some say they've heard it in the dead of night, a deep, slow grinding sound beneath their feet. Others say they've seen shapes rising beneath the dirt, just for a moment before sinking back down. Whatever's happening to the land, it's not stopping. It's not slowing down, and I don't think we have a say in where it moves next. If you felt it, you already know. Time isn't holding together anymore. It used to be predictable, unshakable, a straight line stretching forward. Now it bends, phrase at the edges loops back on itself. I don't know if the invaders did this, if the war did, or if the world just decided it had enough and started unraveling on its own. But I know it's happening, and I know it's getting worse. People are losing time. Not in the way you do when you're exhausted, not in the way hunger blurs the days together. I mean hours vanishing in the space of a breath. Survivors have told me they'll sit down to rest, close their eyes for what feels like a moment, and when they look up, the sun has shifted across the sky, the stars have moved, and the air is colder. Some lose whole nights this way, waking up in places they don't remember walking to, with no memory of how they got there. A scavenger from Zone F8 told me he stopped to check his map while traveling a stretch of abandoned highway. He glanced down at it, traced a route with his finger, looked up, and the entire landscape had changed. The road he had been following was gone, replaced by overgrown fields that stretched endlessly in both directions. He turned in a circle, trying to find something familiar, but there was nothing, just a horizon that felt too far away. The worst part, he swears he heard his own voice behind him, calling his name. When he turned, no one was there. It's not just individuals. Groups have gone through this together. I've spoken to survivors who are traveling in teams, keeping count of their steps, their rations, their time. And then, all at once, it shifts. One moment they're walking under a gray, cloud-choked sky. Then suddenly, it's night. No transition. No task. Just an instant, jarring switch like someone flipped a switch on the whole world. Their watches. Worthless. The numbers mean nothing anymore. Some people aren't just losing time. They're repeating it. I've heard reports from those who swear they've lived the same hour, the same day over and over. A woman in Zone C5 claimed she relit the same fire 3 nights in a row, watched the same embers burn down to ash, felt the same cold creeping into her bones. She only escaped it when she forced herself to move, to leave behind everything and run. But even then, she wasn't sure if she had actually broken free or just stepped into another loop, slightly different from the first. Buildings aren't immune to this either. Some places disappear, but others return, changed. There are survivors who have walked back to old safe zones, places they used before, only to find them exactly as they were months ago. Down to the last detail. Food still fresh on the tables, fires still smoldering, doors still swinging open as if someone had just left. But when they step inside, the air feels thick, heavy, like something is watching. Some leave immediately, others stay, thinking they've found a miracle, only to wake up outside the next morning with no memory of how they got there. And then there are the time gaps. I don't have another word for them. Pockets of the world where time runs faster, slower, or not at all. Survivors in Zone E3 reported a stretch of land where everything inside it moved sluggishly. Birds frozen mid-flight, rain suspended in the air like glass beads. One of them walked in, waved to his friends, took another step, and then he was gone. They swore they saw him still moving in slow motion, his expression locked in place, like he was walking through something too thick to escape. They waited. He never made it out. I met someone who claims he saw the opposite, a woman who moved too fast. He said he was sitting near a collapsed freeway, checking his supplies, when she appeared out of nowhere. One moment, the road was empty. The next, she was standing there, gasping for breath. She looked around in panic, eyes wild, muttering about how it had been days, how she had been running for days. But for him, she had only just arrived. She didn't stay long. She bolted down the road at full speed, and before he could call after her, she vanished again. Then there are those who see themselves. More than a few survivors have told me they've spotted figures in the distance that look too familiar. A traveler near Zone D6 was sure he saw someone walking the same road as him, just ahead. Same stride, same gear, same torn jacket. He picked up his pace, trying to catch up, but every time he got closer, the figure stayed just ahead. When he finally got near enough to see its face, he stopped cold. It was him. Same scars, same eyes, looking right back at him. And then it turned a corner, and when he followed, it was gone. If you think you're safe from this because you haven't noticed it yet, don't be so sure. Time is warping whether we realize it or not. We're losing more than just minutes, more than just hours. Some of us are losing ourselves. If you've been paying attention, you've already felt it. The world isn't just falling apart, it's unraveling. The boundaries between what's real and what isn't aren't as solid as they used to be. The reflections in the glass, the shadows on the walls, the way things don't line up the way they should. It's not just paranoia. It's happening. I've heard too many stories to ignore it. Mirrors that don't show what's in front of them. Windows that reveal places that aren't outside. Some survivors claim their reflections linger after they move, just for a second, just long enough to make them doubt themselves. Others say they've seen things in the glass that shouldn't be there. Rooms behind them that don't exist, doors that aren't open in the real world but swing wide in the reflection. A group of travelers passing through Zone F2 found an abandoned gas station. They set up camp for the night, using the broken windows as lookout points. Sometime after midnight, one of them woke up to find the reflection in the window staring at him. Not him, his reflection. It was standing when he was lying down. Its head was tilted, its mouth moving like it was trying to say something, but no sound came through. He screamed, woke the others, and when they looked, it was gone. Just a normal reflection again. They left before dawn. And then there are the mirrors that don't break. A scavenger near the ruins of a shopping mall tried to smash a mirror that had been giving him a bad feeling. He hit it with a crowbar, expecting it to shatter, but it didn't. The glass rippled, bent inward like the surface of a pond. He ran before he could see what was on the other side. I think that was the right call. Some survivors have stopped using mirrors entirely. They cover them, smash them, avoid looking too long. But it's not just mirrors. Anything reflective is a risk. Puddles, polished metal, even the darkened screen of a dead television. The worst stories come from those who've seen something looking back that wasn't themselves. A woman in Zone D4 swears she saw someone else in her reflection. A man with her face, her features, but wrong. Sunken eyes, too many teeth. She stepped back. He didn't. He leaned forward, pressed a hand against the glass from the inside, and whispered something she couldn't hear. She ran. When she looked again, her reflection was normal, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that something had followed her out. Then there's the glass that shows the wrong time. Survivors have reported looking into mirrors and seeing daylight when it's night outside, seeing empty streets when they know there are people behind them. Some have seen places they've never been, glimpses of ruined cities, unfamiliar landscapes, faces they don't recognize staring back at them. A man in Zone G6 said he glanced at his reflection in a window and saw an entire city skyline behind him. Problem was, he was in the middle of a wasteland. No buildings for miles. But there they were, towers stretching into the sky, untouched, pristine. When he turned around, the ruins were still there. When he looked back at the window, the city was gone. And some people don't come back from it at all. A group passing through Zone C3 found a house with all its mirrors covered in cloth. They made the mistake of pulling one down. One of them, his name was Caleb, looked into the glass and stopped moving. The others tried to shake him, snap him out of it, but he just kept staring. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out the door. He didn't take his pack, didn't acknowledge them calling his name. They followed him as far as they could, but he kept walking, straight into the woods, and never came back. It's not just mirrors. Sometimes it's the shadows. There have been reports of people standing still, noticing their shadow moving on its own. Not the way it should with shifting light, but independently. A survivor near the wreckage of an old radio tower said he noticed his shadow twitching, like it was trying to separate from him. He stepped away, stayed in place, and then it started to rise. Other times, it's doors. People stepping through thresholds only to find themselves somewhere else entirely. A woman near Zone E9 entered a small bunker, ducked through the entrance, and emerged in the middle of an open field miles away from where she started. She had no idea how she got there. The veil is thin. That's what survivors are calling it. The invisible wall between what we know and what we were never meant to see. And it's wearing away. Maybe it was always fragile. Maybe the war, the invaders, whatever they're doing to this world. Maybe that's what's tearing it apart. Either way, if you see something in the glass that doesn't belong, If you step through a door and the world feels different, if your shadow doesn't follow the way it should, don't ignore it. Because once you notice it, it notices you too. If you're still moving, still traveling between what's left of the cities and the stretches of wasteland in between, you've probably seen them by now. The figures. They don't stand in groups. They don't speak. They just appear, always at a distance, always watching. People started reporting them months ago. First, no one thought much of it. A shape on the horizon, too far to make out, standing motionless against the ruins of the world. But then more stories came in. Survivors who swore they saw the same figure multiple times, standing in the same place even after they had traveled miles. Some tried to approach. They never made it close enough. No matter how far they walked, no matter how many steps they took, the distance never changed. They're always alone, always just standing there. And the worst part is, they don't seem to be waiting for anything. They just exist, like something left behind, something that shouldn't be here but refuses to leave. A man traveling along the cracked remains of Highway 17 told me he had been walking for hours, keeping to the edges of the road, staying low. Then he saw it, just past an overturned semi, standing in the middle of the asphalt, a tall, thin figure. It wasn't doing anything. It wasn't moving. But something about it was wrong. It had no features, no defining shape, just an outline, a human form standing impossibly still. He thought maybe it was a trick of the light, until he blinked, and it was closer. I've heard too many of those stories. People seeing the figures shift position in the space of a breath. One moment they're on the horizon, the next they're just a little closer. Not walking, not running, just appearing like time had skipped and brought them forward. No footsteps, no noise, just that creeping sense of something drawing near. A group of 3 scavengers tried to test it. They found one of these figures standing near a broken bridge outside of Zone F4. They marked the ground, set up a small fire, even built a barricade of junk between them and it. Then they sat down to wait. They didn't take their eyes off it, not for a second. Hours passed. Nothing changed. No movement, no reaction. Then, at some point, one of them had to shift, had to glance away just for a moment. When they looked back, it was standing on the other side of the barricade. They ran. They didn't stop until sunrise. It isn't just open roads and highways. Some of them appear inside cities, standing between buildings, waiting just beyond doorways. People traveling through abandoned neighborhoods have seen them at the ends of long hallways, near shattered windows, watching from rooftops. Always still, always silent, and always closer when you look away. A woman passing through what used to be the outskirts of Zone C9 was cutting through an old shopping district when she saw one inside a department store. It was standing in the shattered remains of the storefront window, facing her, still as stone. She swears it wasn't there when she passed by that street earlier. She swears it wasn't there when she first glanced at the window. But when she looked again, it was. She said she stared at it for a full minute, waiting for it to move, waiting for it to do something. Didn't. Then she turned and walked away. She thought that was the end of it. But when she reached the end of the street, she felt something behind her. She turned. It was standing right there, right where she had just been. She ran. Some people have seen them at night, standing just beyond the reach of firelight, their silhouettes blending into the darkness. A survivor camping in an old factory on the edge of Zone D2 saw one standing outside his shelter. He tried to ignore it, told himself it was just an abandoned post, a trick of the moonlight, but he couldn't sleep. He kept watching, kept checking to see if it was still there. It was. Then, sometime past midnight, he blinked, and it was inside the factory. No one knows what happens if they get close enough to touch you. No one's lived long enough to tell that story. The only thing we know for sure is that they don't leave until you do. And even then, sometimes they follow. If you're traveling, keep your eyes ahead, but check your surroundings. If you see a figure in the distance, standing perfectly still, don't try to approach it. Don't test it. And whatever you do, don't look away. Technology used to be predictable. A tool, a weapon, a convenience, a curse. But it was always something we controlled. Something that bent to human hands and human minds. That isn't the case anymore. I've seen it firsthand. Machines that should be dead, circuits fried, batteries drained, yet they still move, they still hum, and sometimes they respond. Survivors passing through what's left of Zone E4 found an old radio tower, half collapsed, barely standing. It should have been nothing more than rust and rubble, another ruin in a world full of them. But when they got close, they heard voices, faint, distorted, filtering through the static like a distant conversation. They thought maybe it was another transmission, another survivor trying to make contact. Then one of them recognized their own voice in the static, a conversation they had days ago. Their own words played back to them in pieces, out of order, looping in ways that didn't make sense. And underneath it all, something else. A second voice, deeper, slower, repeating the same phrase over and over in a language none of them understood. They left before they could hear what it was trying to say. Drones are still in the air. Not human ones, not military models. These are something else. They don't fly like machines should. No engine noise, no exhaust, just silent movement, like they're gliding through the air, watching. Some of them flicker, appearing and disappearing like a glitch in reality. Others don't move at all. They just hover, waiting. The scavenger near Zone F6 tried to shoot one down. It didn't react, didn't dodge, didn't retaliate. The bullet passed right through it like it wasn't even there. Then, a few minutes later, his radio started picking up a new frequency. A voice, soft and distant, whispering his name. No one else heard it. It isn't just the drones. Streetlights still flicker in abandoned cities, blinking in perfect synchronization even when the grid should be dead. Survivors have found vending machines humming softly, their lights pulsing as if breathing. Someone told me they passed a gas station where the pumps were still running, leaking blackened fuel onto the pavement even though no power should be left. And then there are the devices that turn on by themselves. Radios, televisions, computers. They don't just flicker to life, they show things. Images of places that don't exist anymore. Faces of people long dead. Some survivors claim they've seen themselves on the screens, doing things they haven't done yet, saying things they don't remember saying. A woman traveling through the ruins of an old shopping mall told me she stopped in front of a row of shattered TVs. Most were broken, black screens covered in dust, but one of them turned on as she passed. No static, no distortion, just a perfect reflection of the store behind her, except she wasn't in it. She stared at it for a while, trying to understand what she was looking at. Then, just as she turned to leave, she saw something move in the screen. Not her, not a reflection, but something else. Something standing just outside the store entrance. She turned back to look. Nothing was there. When she looked at the screen again, the power was off. And then there are the machines that move on their own. A group of scavengers found an old office building still running. The computers blinking, the fans humming. They thought maybe it was a generator still kicking, something they could use. But when they tried to shut the machines down, the lights flickered, and the keyboards started typing by themselves. Just one sentence over and over. You shouldn't be here. They left. It isn't just human machines. Survivors have come across things that don't match any known technology. Strange metallic structures, pulsing with light, half buried in the ruins. Devices that resemble radios but don't pick up any frequencies we recognize. A man near Zone D7 found a small, silver sphere resting in the middle of an abandoned road. It was smooth, featureless, no buttons, no seams. When he picked it up, he said he heard a low hum, felt something vibrate deep in his bones. He dropped it and the sound stopped instantly. When he bent down to pick it up again, it was gone. Some survivors have tried to take these objects with them, thinking they might be useful. The ones who do usually regret it. They start hearing things, seeing things. Some claim their dreams become infected with voices, strange images of places they've never been. Others just vanish. Technology is no longer ours. The invaders have twisted it, bent it into something unrecognizable. Maybe they're using it to track us, to study us, to rewrite the rules of the world itself. Or maybe the machines are waking up on their own. Maybe they've been listening all along. And maybe now they've started whispering back. Nature was supposed to be the one thing that didn't turn against us. Cities crumbled, the sky broke open, time lost its grip, but the trees, the rivers, the mountains, they should have stayed the same. They haven't. I don't know if the invaders are doing this, if the war warped something deep in the earth, or if nature is simply adapting to a world that no longer makes sense. But whatever is happening out there in the wild places, it's not natural. The trees are changing. Not just the shape of the forests, not just the way the vegetation spreads into places it never should have reached. The trees themselves. Survivors passing through the deep woods near Zone C7 reported finding entire groves where the bark was split open, lined with something that looked like veins. When they cut one of them open, it bled. Not sap, something darker, thicker. And the worst part, the wounds started closing up while they were still watching. In some places, the trees have eyes. I don't mean knots in the bark, not patterns that happen to look like pupils in irises. I mean actual, living, moving eyes embedded in the wood. Some are the size of marbles, others as large as a human fist. They open when you get close. They blink, and if you stay too long, they start watching you. A group of travelers camping near the edge of a forest in Zone F5 woke up to find hundreds of them staring from the branches above. The eyes weren't there when they went to sleep. They didn't wait to see what would happen next. Then there's the way the animals behave now. Birds that should migrate haven't moved in months. Whole flocks just sitting in the branches, silent, unmoving, eyes locked on whatever passes below. A man traveling alone through Zone D3 noticed a pattern in their perches. Rows, straight lines, too perfect to be natural. When he looked back an hour later, they had shifted positions. Still aligned, still watching. And it's not just the birds. The deer aren't afraid of people anymore. They don't bolt when they hear footsteps, don't flinch at the sound of gunfire. Some just stand there, staring, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. A woman near the remains of an old farmstead swears she saw a herd of them standing in a circle around something she couldn't see, their antlers tangled together like twisted roots. She didn't get close enough to find out what was in the middle. Wolves have gone silent. They still hunt, still move through the forests in packs, but no one hears them coming anymore. Their howls are gone. Their growls, their panting, the sound of their paws against the dirt, gone. Like something took their voices away, or like they're waiting for the right moment to use them again. And then there are the ones that don't act like animals at all. Survivors near Zone G9 found what they thought was a stray dog, thin and starving, wandering near their camp. It followed them for days, keeping its distance but always watching. It never ate, never drank, just stood there waiting. Eventually, one of them tried to approach it, offering food, tilted its head, just slightly, and then it spoke. Not in a growl, not in an animal's voice. In a whisper, a human whisper. They left the camp that night. Some of you might have seen the glowing trees by now, the ones that pulse faintly in the dark, like something is alive inside them. A group of scavengers tried to cut one down in Zone E8. The moment the first axe hit the bark, the light inside it flared, so bright it burned their eyes. When the glow faded, the tree was gone. No stump, no fallen trunk, just a ring of scorched earth where it had been. The forests aren't safe anymore. They stretch further each day, creeping into ruins, overtaking roads that were clear just weeks ago. The vines climb higher, the roots burrow deeper, and in some places, the trees themselves move when no one is looking. A man who took shelter in a thicket for the night woke up to find the trees had grown closer, pressing in on all sides, their branches woven together to block out the sky. He had to cut his way out, and there's something else, something deeper. Some people have heard it. A sound beneath the rustling leaves, beneath the wind moving through the branches. A voice, not words, not in any language we understand, but a low, rhythmic murmur, echoing from the heart of the forests. It's in the roots, in the trunks, in the earth itself. Some survivors say they felt it under their skin, like the ground was trying to hum along with it. If you're traveling through the woods, don't trust the paths. They change. Landmarks move. What you thought was a straight route becomes a maze before you realize you've lost your way. Some people never find their way back out, and if you hear something calling your name from deep within the trees, don't answer. Whatever is whispering out there, Whatever is watching from the branches, it already knows you're listening. If you're anywhere near the coast, if you can still hear the crash of waves in the distance, pay attention. The ocean isn't what it used to be. It doesn't move the way it should. It doesn't sound the way it should. And some nights, it doesn't stop at the shore. The tides are reaching further inland, not in slow, creeping erosion, not in the way the sea has always claimed the land inch by inch over centuries. This is different. Entire stretches of coastline swallowed overnight. Beaches that once had docks and shipwrecks are just gone, replaced by smooth, featureless water that never seems to ripple. Survivors who lived near the cliffs say they've woken up to find the horizon closer than it was the day before. A man traveling near Zone F9 set up camp in what used to be a dry basin. He said the land had been barren for weeks, the salt crusted over like scars on the earth. When he woke up, he was surrounded by water. No storm, no rain, no sign that anything had moved. Just an endless, still ocean stretching out in every direction. He swam for hours trying to find land. When he finally did, exhausted, he turned back to look. The water was gone. There are places where the sea no longer reflects. It used to be that when the sky turned black, the ocean mirrored it, stars shimmering in the waves. But now, some parts of the water just absorb the light. No glimmer, no reflection, just a bottomless void where the surface should be. A woman near Zone E3 described looking down into one of these places and feeling something looking back. She didn't stay long enough to see what it was. People have reported hearing voices near the water. Not echoes, not the rush of waves against rocks, but voices, calling names, whispering in languages no one recognizes. Some survivors say the voices come from the depths, rising up like something drowning beneath the surface. Others say they come from the air, carried on the wind, familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. A scavenger searching for supplies along the remnants of a fishing town said he heard his mother's voice coming from the tide. She had been dead for years. He knew it wasn't real. He knew better than to listen, but the voice didn't stop. It followed him as he walked, always just behind the next wave, always just out of sight. When he finally turned to look, the shore had disappeared. He barely made it back. It isn't just the water. The things that live in it have changed. Fish wash up on the shore, their bodies smooth and featureless. No eyes, no mouths, no gills. Some of them are still alive, writhing on the sand even though they have no way to breathe. Others dissolve the moment they're touched, breaking apart into thick, black liquid that stains the ground for days. A group of survivors in Zone C6 saw something rise from the deep, something too large to be a whale, too long to be anything human science had ever classified. It didn't breach the surface like an animal coming up for air. It just hovered there, half submerged, a long, coiling shape pressing up against the underside of the waves. They ran before it could rise any further. They say the water itself pulsed, bending outward like something massive had exhaled beneath it. There are lights in the depths. Some nights, the sea glows in patterns, circles, spirals, lines that stretch for miles. Not bioluminescence, not plankton catching the moonlight. These are deliberate. Some survivors think they're signals, messages meant for something else. Others think they're warnings. Then there are the disappearances. Entire boats gone without a trace. No wreckage, no bodies. Some left behind distress calls, garbled transmissions of voices speaking in panic tones, then silence. A lone fisherman near Zone D8 made it back to shore, his eyes hollow, his skin pale. He wouldn't speak for days. When he finally did, all he would say was that the water had opened up, and something had been waiting beneath it. Some of you may have noticed that the sea doesn't sound right anymore. The waves used to crash against the land, rhythmic, predictable. Now, sometimes the ocean just stops making noise. No waves, no movement, just a vast, soundless stretch of water that seems to hold its breath. And then, when the silence finally breaks, the tide comes in all at once, rushing forward in a single unnatural surge. The old rules don't apply anymore. The ocean isn't a boundary, isn't a refuge. It isn't something we can predict or control. The only thing I know for sure is that it's changing, and whatever's beneath the surface isn't sleeping anymore. If you're traveling in a group, if you've been moving with the same people for weeks, for months, pay attention. Watch the way they walk. Listen to the way they talk. Because some of them aren't the same anymore. I'm not talking about exhaustion, not about the wear and tear of survival. Everyone's changed since this started. We all move slower, we all carry the weight of things we've lost. But this is something else. This is wrong. Survivors have been reporting strange behavior among their own. People who stop sleeping but never seem tired. People who eat less, speak less, but still keep going. Some of them don't even realize it's happening. They just wake up one morning and something is missing, something small. A tick, a habit, a piece of themselves that used to be there. And once it starts, it doesn't stop. A man traveling through Zone C3 swears his partner changed overnight. She went to sleep like normal, curled up in the corner of an abandoned diner, her breathing steady. But when she woke up, she didn't stretch the way she always did, didn't yawn, didn't say anything at all, just stood up and started packing like nothing was different. He asked her if she was feeling all right, and she answered in a way that didn't sound like her. Same voice, same words, but too precise, too measured, like she was trying to imitate herself. He stayed with her for 2 more days before he couldn't take it anymore. She didn't blink as often as she used to, didn't ask questions the way she always did. And then, on the last night, he caught her watching him while he slept. Not standing, not sitting, just staring, her eyes wide open, unmoving. When he finally spoke her name, she blinked once, slow, like she was remembering to do it. Then she smiled, just a little too late, and lay back down without a word. He left before she woke up. Others have noticed the same thing. People in their groups slowly losing the little things that made them human. A man who used to hum under his breath while he walked suddenly going silent. A woman who always tied her boots the same way forgetting how. Some survivors try to ignore it. They tell themselves it's just stress, just trauma. But eventually, they all see it. The moment when someone they trust slips into something else. One group near Zone E5 realized something was wrong when they noticed a pattern. One of their own had stopped talking as much, responding only when spoken to, only answering exactly what was asked. At first, they chalked it up to exhaustion. But then they noticed something worse. He had stopped using contractions. No more I'm, just I am. No more can't, just cannot. Like someone trying too hard to sound normal. They tested him, started asking questions they already knew the answers to. His birthday, his mother's name, the color of the car they used to travel in before it broke down. He got them all right, every single one. But his voice never wavered. His tone never changed. He never paused to think. When they finally confronted him, asked him what had happened, why he had changed, he didn't respond at first. Just stood there, staring at them. Then he smiled, too slow, too controlled, and said, "I am the same as I have always been." They left him behind. Some people don't even get that far. They wake up to find someone in their group gone, only to meet them again days later. Same face, same clothes, but not the same. One traveler near Zone F9 said he lost his brother in a storm. Searched for him for days, convinced he was dead. Then, one morning, he turned a corner and found him standing in the middle of an empty street, waiting. He ran to him, grabbed his shoulders, asked where he had been. His brother just looked at him and said, "I am back now." That was the only thing he would say. And it's not just people we know. Sometimes it's strangers. A woman alone on the road who asks for food but never eats it. A man standing at a crossroads who offers directions but never moves from his spot, no matter how many times he's passed. People who don't belong to any camp, who don't carry supplies, who don't seem to be going anywhere. The ones who do speak tend to repeat themselves. They say things twice, as if trying to convince themselves of their own words. A survivor near Zone D6 met a man who shook his hand and said, "It is good to see you. It is good to see you." The second time, it wasn't a mistake. It was something else. And then there are the ones who don't talk at all. The ones who just stand there, motionless, watching. A group passing through an abandoned apartment complex found a woman standing in the middle of the hallway, facing the wall. She didn't react when they called to her, didn't turn when they got closer. One of them finally reached out to touch her shoulder. The moment his fingers made contact, she turned and smiled. He screamed. He didn't know why. If someone in your group changes, if they stop acting like themselves, if they forget things they shouldn't forget, if their voice sounds just a little too perfect, watch them carefully. Because some of them aren't real anymore. And whatever they've become, it's starting to spread. If you're still using old maps, still relying on the shape of the world as it used to be, stop. The landmarks are disappearing. Not in the slow, gradual way where buildings crumble and forests reclaim the land. Not in the way of time and decay. They're being taken, erased, and whatever's replacing them doesn't belong. Survivors near Zone D3 returned to a site they had used for shelter. A hotel that had somehow remained standing, its walls scorched but intact, a beacon in a dead city. It had been there for months, a place people passed through, a marker of where they'd been and where they were going. But when they arrived, it was gone. Not collapsed, not burned to the ground, just gone. The lot where it had stood was perfectly smooth, the ground unbroken, as if nothing had ever been built there at all. No rubble, no foundation, no remnants of what had once been. It was like the earth had never known it existed. A group traveling near the outskirts of Zone F5 saw it happen in real time. They had been moving toward an old shopping plaza, a place they had scavenged before. From the distance, they could still see it. Rows of abandoned storefronts, the broken signs hanging at odd angles. Then, as they got closer, they blinked, and it was gone. No sound, no shift, no explosion of dust, just empty space where it had been. One of them claimed they could still feel it, said when they reached the edge of where it should have been, the air was thick, heavy, like walking through something invisible. Another said he saw a faint shimmer in the distance, like heat rising off pavement, like the ghost of a place that had been erased but not completely forgotten. They didn't stay to see if it would come back. The disappearances aren't random. They seem deliberate, methodical. Some survivors believe the invaders are rewriting the world piece by piece, erasing the old to make room for whatever comes next. Others think it's something else entirely, something older, something waking up beneath us, pulling the landmarks down into the ground like a child sweeping away pieces on a game board. It's not just buildings. Natural formations are vanishing too. A man who had taken refuge in a canyon in Zone G2 left to gather supplies and returned to find the walls of rock that had surrounded him were gone. Not collapsed, not eroded, just gone. The ground where the canyon had been was flat and featureless, stretching into the horizon like it had never been anything else. He stood there for hours, staring at the space where he had lived, trying to convince himself he hadn't imagined it. Some places that disappear come back, but not the way they were before. Survivors have reported revisiting old shelters, old cities, only to find them changed. The roads lead to the wrong places. The buildings are taller or shorter, or arranged in ways that make no sense. A woman near Zone E7 entered what she thought was an old library she had stayed in before. Same walls, same entrance, same cracked marble floor. But the books were gone, replaced by rows of empty shelves. The second floor didn't exist anymore, and the doors she had once used to leave the building now opened into dead-end hallways. She tried to retrace her steps, to find the exit she had used before. But the moment she turned a corner, the entire layout shifted. The hallway she had just walked through was gone. In its place was a staircase leading downward, a staircase that hadn't been there before. She didn't take it. She turned back, moved as fast as she could, refusing to blink, refusing to hesitate. When she finally stumbled outside, gasping for breath, the building behind her was different. It was taller, and it had more windows than it should have. Some landmarks aren't just vanishing, they're being replaced. Survivors in Zone C8 found a series of black monoliths standing in a field where houses had once been. There was no sign of the homes that had been there before. No broken foundations, no debris. Just those towering structures, smooth and silent, humming faintly in the wind. When one of them touched the surface, the hum grew louder, vibrating through their bones. The others pulled him away before he could do it again. When they looked back, the monoliths were gone. I've heard stories of people who stay too long in the places that are changing. They start forgetting details. They mix up directions, lose track of where they are. A man near Zone F2 returned to an old outpost where he had stayed with his group weeks before. He swore it looked the same at first. Same walls, same cots, same supplies left scattered on the floor. Then he noticed the photos. Someone in his group had taken pictures, old Polaroids, snapshots of the camp, of the people who had been there. He found them right where they had been left, tucked into the frame of a shattered mirror. But the photos weren't right anymore. The faces were blurred. The buildings were different. In one, there was a structure in the background that had never been there before, a massive, jagged tower stretching into the sky. In another, a shadow stood where no one should have been standing. He didn't recognize the place in the last photo. If you're traveling by memory, if you're relying on familiar landmarks to guide you, don't. The world is shifting, and the places we used to know are disappearing. And some of them, when they return, are bringing something else with them. There are places in this world that weren't here before, structures that no one built, objects that don't belong to anything we understand, things that have no history, no purpose, and no explanation. A group of survivors passing through Zone G3 found a building that shouldn't have existed. They had been traveling through open fields, nothing but dead grass and cracked earth stretching for miles. Then, one morning, they woke up to find a tower standing just ahead of them. It wasn't there the night before. It had no signs of construction, no markings, no wear or damage. Just smooth, black stone rising high into the sky, featureless except for a single doorway cut into its base. One of them wanted to go inside. The others refused. They stood there for hours arguing until something changed. The door, which had been open, silently swung shut. Then the ground beneath them vibrated, a deep, low hum that rattled in their bones. They left without looking back. It's not just buildings. Some people have found objects, things that don't belong in this world. A man traveling near the ruins of a stadium in Zone D9 found a cube sitting in the middle of the road. It wasn't metal, wasn't stone. It had no seams, no texture, no weight when he picked it up. It was cold, unnaturally cold, even under the heat of the sun. When he tilted it, light bent around its edges, distorting reality itself. He kept it for a day before he woke up with blood pouring from his nose and ears. He threw it into a river. The next morning, it was back in his pack. Another group found what they thought was an old payphone, still standing in the wreckage of a collapsed shopping center. The receiver was off the hook, swinging gently as if someone had just let go of it. One of them picked it up, expecting nothing but dead air. Instead, he heard breathing, slow, measured, deliberate. He asked who was there. The breathing stopped. Then the voice on the other end whispered, "I see you." They smashed the phone and ran. Some of these things aren't stationary. There are reports of structures appearing in places they shouldn't be, only to disappear just as quickly. Survivors in Zone E5 camped near a bridge one night, taking shelter beneath its crumbling concrete beams. When they woke up, the bridge was gone. No rubble, no dust, no sign that it had ever been there at all. But the road still led right up to where it should have been, cutting off into empty air. And then there are the doors. They show up in the middle of nowhere, freestanding, unattached to any structure. Some of them look new, clean, like they've just been installed. Others are old, rotting wood, handles rusted over. But they all have one thing in common. They shouldn't be there. A traveler near Zone F8 found one in the middle of an open desert, standing alone with nothing around it for miles. He circled it, checked the back, looked underneath. Nothing. Just a frame, just a door. Against his better judgment, he tried the handle. Turned easily. When he opened it, there was no desert on the other side. No wasteland, no sky. Just an empty black void stretching endlessly. The air around him pulled, just slightly, like whatever was inside wanted him to step through. He slammed it shut and ran. When he looked back, the door was gone. There are more stories like this. People finding staircases leading up to nowhere. perfectly clean and untouched despite the world around them being in ruins. Rooms that appear inside buildings they've been in before. Rooms that weren't there the last time they passed through. Hallways that stretch too long, doorways that open into the wrong places. And then there are the people who go in and don't come back. A group of 3 scavengers found a house in Zone C2. A normal house, untouched by fire, by war, by decay. It stood in the middle of a dead neighborhood, its windows intact, its front door slightly ajar. They decided to check inside. One of them waited outside while the other 2 entered. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, the one outside called to them. No answer. He stepped into the doorway, just to the threshold, just far enough to see into the front hall. It was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no dust, no sign of life. His friends were gone. He ran. The next day, he passed by the same street again. The house was gone too. Whatever these places are, whatever these objects are, they aren't mistakes. They aren't accidents. They are here for a reason. Maybe they've always been here, just waiting for us to notice. Or maybe they're part of something bigger, something we aren't meant to understand. If you find something that shouldn't exist, if you come across a door that leads to nowhere, a structure that wasn't there before, an object that doesn't behave the way it should, walk away. Some things aren't meant to be found. And some places, once you enter, won't ever let you leave. Survivors, if you've made it this far, if you're still listening, then you're still here, still fighting. That has to count for something. The world isn't what it was. You don't need me to tell you that. You've seen it. You've felt it. The ground beneath your feet isn't steady anymore. The sky isn't honest. The air carries whispers that don't belong to anyone. Time bends when you're not paying attention. And even the people around you, friends, family, the ones you trust, aren't always who they say they are. Maybe you've adapted. Maybe you've stopped questioning it. Maybe you've convinced yourself that if you just keep moving, just keep surviving, none of it will matter. Maybe you're right, but ignoring the truth won't stop what's coming. The invaders haven't gone away. They haven't stopped watching. Whatever they're doing, whatever they're changing, they're not finished. They move in the spaces between logic, between the cracks in reality. They don't attack the way we expect. They don't fight the way we understand. They take, they replace, they erase, and we still don't know what they want. We don't even know if they're winning. Some of you have tried to fight back. You've torn down their machines, burned their outposts, destroyed what you could. You've pushed against the things they're building, the things they're shaping, the new world they're carving out of the bones of the old. And yet, it keeps happening, like water filling the space where something used to be. Others have tried to hide, to disappear into the ruins, into the forests, into the places where even the invaders don't seem to go. But nowhere is truly safe. Nowhere is untouched. You can barricade the doors, black out the windows, keep your footsteps light and your voice quiet or still. But eventually, something will find you. Something will press against the edges of your shelter, seep through the cracks, reach into your dreams. Maybe you've met them already. The people who shouldn't be here. The ones who stand too still. The ones who smile just a little too late. The ones who repeat themselves like they're trying to remember what being human is supposed to sound like. Maybe you've passed them on the road. Maybe one of them is in your camp right now. Maybe you've seen the places that weren't here yesterday, the doors that lead to nowhere, the roads that twist in circles when they shouldn't, the cities that vanish and return as something else. Maybe you've watched the landmarks dissolve, the past rewritten while you stood there helpless, unable to stop it. Maybe you felt the pull of the sea, the weight of the sky, the tremors beneath your feet that don't belong to any natural fault line. Maybe you've heard your own name whispered from the dark and chosen not to turn around. That was the right choice. The rules of the world have changed. Or maybe they were never rules at all, just the illusion of order before something older woke up and reminded us how small we really are. But there is one truth that hasn't changed. One thing that, despite everything, still matters. You are still here. You are still breathing. The invaders haven't taken that from you yet. The world hasn't erased you yet. Maybe it's luck. Maybe it's instinct. Maybe it's sheer stubbornness. But whatever it is, you've made it through another night, and that's something. because every second you survive is one they didn't expect. I don't know how long this broadcast will hold. I don't know when Station Zebra will have to move again. The signal might go dark tomorrow, next week, next month. But for now, it's still reaching you. And as long as it does, you are not alone. Keep moving, keep watching, keep questioning. Don't let them make you forget who you are. This is Atlas, signing off.